Bienvenue to Bonjour Paris Live. Our online event series, free for Bonjour Paris members, offers expert lectures, discovery talks, and conversations about la vie française. In between your trips to France, we're here to inspire you. Bonjour Paris has been online since 1995, almost as old as the internet itself. Our website is packed with interesting articles about the culture and history of Paris. And now, thanks to the support of our growing membership base, we're able to showcase new offerings like video and online talks. For details about all the benefits of Bonjour Paris membership, visit our membership page on our website. Enjoy today's presentation and à bientôt!
Hello, bonjour, bienvenue. Welcome to Bonjour Paris Live. I am Sylvia Davis, culture editor for France Media and your host today with our nod to Halloween with a spectacular cemetery crawl across Paris with walking tour author Stuart Ross. So let's get to it. I'll now invite Stu to start his video. Hello, Stu.
Hello, Sylvia.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So let me introduce you just in case some more of our viewers today haven't seen your previous events. Stuart Ross is the author and publisher of 5 historical walking guidebooks on Paris, including Where Did They Put the Guillotine? A walking tour of revolutionary Paris 1789 to 1794, and Where Did They Put the Gestapo Headquarters? A walking tour of Nazi-occupied Paris. The 5 books encompass the French Revolution, medieval Paris, and the German occupation. A former commercial banker, when he's not traveling or on the road, researching his next book, Stu enjoys spending time with his wife Sandy at home in sunny Florida. And thank you very much, Sandy, for your kindness in coordinating this presentation today for us. So if you're ready, Stu, you can just take it from here.
Okay, thank you. Great. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Halloween presentation on some curious Paris cemeteries.
Yeah, I have my little pumpkin and flowers for you, Stu.
There you go. I want to take you on some walks through 3 public Paris cemeteries this morning and introduce you to some occupants who, during their time, were the celebrities of their day. Many of you have gone to cemeteries in Paris, probably Père Lachaise being the number one, and you've gone to see the famous people. You've seen Chopin, you've seen Piaf, Jim Morrison, Oscar Wilde. Well, today, I'm going to introduce you to some occupants that you probably don't know about. These were people who led very, very interesting lives, but they have been lost to time and history, and people don't visit typically their cemetery plots. So hopefully you'll learn something new today and meet some very interesting people. We have a lot of different types of cemeteries in Paris, as you well know. We've got the catacombs, we've got the Pantheon, which Sylvia has already described. We have public and we have private cemeteries. We have ancient cemeteries. They're no longer there because they've removed the remains of the occupants. For example, the Cemetery of the Holy Innocents, which was located in that picture in front of you on the bottom in the middle, they relocated the remains to the catacombs. Even the Seine is a cemetery. Maybe not today, but back in medieval times, they would throw bodies into the river. So it really did become a cemetery. And the illustration you're seeing is the basement of the old Grand Châtelet, which stood on the river. And it was where the Place Saint-Michael's is today. And what you're looking at is an illustration of the morgue that was in the basement. And when they were done, they would throw the bodies into the river. The Paris public cemeteries, there are about 14 of them. We're going to visit the top 3, Père Lachaise, Montmartre, and Montmartre. And those are the 3 big ones that we're going to visit, some of the lesser-known occupants. Before we move on, I wanted to do some graveyard symbolism for you. The one that we learned while researching the French Revolution book was the one in the upper left-hand corner, number 1. That is a truncated obelisk. And this is in a cemetery in Versailles. And it's a mass grave of about 21 people, former prisoners that were being transported back to Paris, coming through Versailles. And they were massacred on the streets there in Versailles and buried with this truncated obelisk. So when you walk through a graveyard and you see a monument, typically an obelisk, that is truncated, what it means is that the occupant or occupants below it met a very tragic and violent death. The second symbolism is the bat. That's number 2, and the bat represents death and rebirth. Number 3, those are the angels. They're messengers between heaven and earth, and the cherub angels always decorate the graves of children. Down in the lower left-hand corner, number 4, that is the flying hourglass. And the flying hourglass represents time passing rapidly. And doesn't it, really? Number 5, I think, is one of the more favorite tombs in Père Lachaise, and this is the Tomb of Fertility. It's the grave of Victor Noir. It's in Père Lachaise, division number 92. And I'm going to let you, based on these 2 pictures, figure out what the symbolism really means. Down in the lower right-hand corner, number 6, is a mausoleum that incorporates 6 or 7 different graveyard symbolisms. You have the draped urn, which was very common in the 18th century. It's the veil between earth and heaven. You've got the inverted torch, which, when it's inverted, means death. And with a flame, it suggests the soul. So let's start with Père Lachaise. Here is a map that you can get online. You don't have to pay the €2. You just download it and take it with you when you go. And on the left-hand corner are the names of the folks who are buried there that we're going to visit. The red circles are around the plot number, the divisions. I'm sorry, they're the divisions. And then on some of them, you have the plot numbers. For example, Jacques-Louis is number 17. So he's in Division 56, but plot number 17. Okay? Père Lachaise was opened in 1804. It's the first city cemetery, the first public city cemetery. It was called the East Cemetery. There was the East, South, North, and West, and we're going to go to 3 of them. It's the largest of all of them. It encompasses about 118 acres, and it is the most visited cemetery in Paris. On the map, you'll see divisions 87 and 96. Those are the Jewish sections, and division number 85 is reserved, or was reserved, for the Muslim burials. So, common questions. How do you get buried in Père Lachaise? How do you become eligible? Well, 2 reasons. Number 1, you have to live in Paris, or you have to die in Paris. Jim Morrison, he didn't live in Paris, but he died in Paris, and so he was eligible to be buried in Père Lachaise. Do you sign a contract? Yes, you do. There are 4 different contracts that you sign. You have a 10-year, a 30-year, a 50-year, or a perpetuity contract. And obviously, it gets more expensive as you go up in contract. Well, Jim Morrison's family signed a 30-year contract, and it was coming up for expiration, and they were not going to renew it. So the Père Lachaise folks said, that's fine. We're just going to take Jim out. We'll cremate him, and we'll put him someplace else. And there was a big battle between the family and Père Lachaise. And they finally ended up signing a perpetuity contract with Père Lachaise. So Jim Morrison will be there forever. The other reason why somebody's remains will be removed by Père Lachaise and put somewhere else is if the family doesn't take care of the gravesite. They have to keep it in a tidy, flowers cut, new flowers. They can't let it go wild, if you will, or else their relative goes bye-bye. So let's start with our first occupant, Jane Avril. She was a dancer, and we all probably know her from this particular poster by Toulouse-Lautrec. That is Jane there. She's high-stepping. She was a French can-can dancer. Jane Avril was her stage name. And back then, the clients of the Moulin Rouge called her dance, quote, hysterical associated with elegance. And she, like I said, she was made famous by Toulouse-Lautrec, and she joined the Moulin Rouge in 1889. She replaced the headliner can-can dancer by the name of Louise Weber. We're going to see her in a little bit. At one point, she married a fellow by the name of Maurice Bias, Biais, and she retired from dancing. She died in poverty, and the family of her husband invited her to be buried in their family plot. So she is buried in the Bias plot that you see on the bottom. The fellow on the upper right-hand corner is Judah Benjamin. He was the first Jewish U.S. senator. There were two others, but they renounced their religion and became Catholic. So Judah refused to renounce his religion, and so he's considered the first Jewish U.S. senator. He turned down an appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court and ultimately became Secretary of War and the Secretary of State for the Confederacy during the United States Civil War. He evaded capture by the federal troops at the end of the war, and he made his way to England, where he became a British lawyer. In later life, he moved to Paris, where his health deteriorated, and he ended up dying of a heart attack and was buried in Père Lachaise. Now, when he was buried, they didn't put a plaque or a headstone on his grave. It was like kind of a pauper's grave, if you will. In 1938, the United States Daughters of the Confederacy ponied up the money to put a tombstone on his grave in Père Lachaise, which you see right there. Sophie Blanchard, interesting lady. She was the first woman to pilot her own balloon and work as a professional balloonist. Her husband was a balloonist, a professional one. And after he died, she continued to perform. And she performed in front of Napoleon, King Louis XVIII, and other kings and queens around Europe. She almost died a couple of times in ballooning accidents while performing around Europe. But on the 6th of July, 1819, while carrying fireworks on board in her basket on the balloon caught on fire. The balloon went down, she fell out of the balloon, and died as a result. The grave site that you see there on the bottom, that monument is a replica of her balloon on fire. Jacques-Louis David was a painter. He was a neoclassical style, and he was a prominent revolutionary and one of the more radical Jacobins during the Revolution, and he voted for King Louis XVI's execution. He painted the death of Marat. You may remember that one, the tennis court oath. And he also sketched Marie Antoinette in her cart that was going on to Place de la Concorde to her execution. If you look at his big paintings where there's a lot of people in it, he always painted himself into the painting. He was arrested after the Revolution, but he got released. And as you remember, Napoleon went into power. Jacques-Louis David became Napoleon's court painter. When the Restoration took place and King Louis XVIII came back on the throne, David self-exiled to Belgium, but at a later date tried to come back to France, and they would not allow him in. Since he voted for the king's execution, Louis XVIII probably would have had him arrested and killed, as he did others who signed that proclamation. So he died in Belgium. The body was not allowed back into France, although his wife was allowed to send the heart. They took his heart out and buried it in Père Lachaise in this tomb, which is his wife's tomb. But David is still buried in Brussels, Belgium. We have Raymond Dessès. He was a lawyer. He was asked to come out of retirement along with two other lawyers, one of whom was a fellow by the name of Guillaume Malesherbes. They were all three asked to come out by the Revolutionary Council to defend Louis XVI. Even the hardcore Jacobins like Campo Marat and Robespierre were impressed with the king's defense that these three lawyers put up. But as we all know, they lost the case and the king lost his head. He was ultimately found guilty by a vote of 692 to 0, and he was condemned to death by one vote, and that was by his cousin Philippe Pétain. So what did the revolutionaries do? What did Robespierre do? He took these three guys, the defense attorneys that they asked to come out of retirement, and threw them in jail. Somehow, 2 out of the 3 survived. On the upper right-hand corner is Eleanor Duplay. She's the daughter of Maurice Duplay. It was in the Duplay apartment at 398 Saint-Honoré that Robespierre and his brother had apartments in. And during that time, Eleanor became Robespierre's girlfriend. After Robespierre's execution, for the rest of her life, she wore black. And you can see that painting up at the top. That was done after the revolution was over, and you can see her in black. Her tombstone, if you look below, Eleanor Duplay, friend of Maximilien Robespierre. She had been arrested, imprisoned, and released, but she lived the rest of her life in solitude. But even to today, she is referred to as the widow of Robespierre. These two are engineers, and I put them on the same page because of that. You have George Haussmann, Baron Haussmann. You may remember him as working for Napoleon III. He was the prefect of the Seine, and he is responsible for the renovation of Paris. He took a medieval city, and over a period of about 17 years, he transformed it into the modern city we see today with the wide avenues, the Haussmann buildings. The problem is that the destruction and the renovation of Paris came at quite a cost, both in economic terms as well as human suffering. So people who do remember Haussmann, there's no gray area with him. It's either black or it's white. He did a great job, or he's responsible for the suffering of people, which in today's world in Paris, we still see the remnants, almost 150 years later. And the mausoleum down below is where he's buried, and that is the Haussmann family museum. The gentleman in the upper right-hand corner is Ferdinand de Lesseps. He was responsible for building the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was a phenomenally successful operation, especially for the French investors who made tons of money off the bonds. And when it came time to do the Panama Canal, he was asked to be the president of the Panama Canal Company and determine where to put the canal and to build the canal. It was a stupendous failure. He tried to build the Panama Canal just like he built the Suez, and they are two different types of engineering issues, two different types of climates, and he failed miserably. The Panama Canal Company went into bankruptcy and had to be liquidated. In 1904, the U.S. bought the assets of the Panama Canal Company and finished the Panama Canal. The scandal that was created was huge, and both he and his son were put on trial, and both were convicted of bribery. A lot of people lost a lot of money on those bonds, those Suez bonds. The mausoleum below is the de Lesseps family mausoleum. Many of you will remember Marcel Marceau. He was considered the world's greatest mime. What people don't realize is Marcel was Jewish, and during World War II, he was a resistant. He lived in hiding the whole occupation, but he worked for the resistance. He worked for what was called the Jewish Army, which was a network of 9 different groups. And his claim to fame during the occupation was that he saved the lives of hundreds and hundreds of children. What he did was he dressed up the boys, and these were primarily boys. He dressed them up as Boy Scouts, and he dressed up as the Scoutmaster. And they marched to the Swiss border, and he got these Boy Scouts across the border. And so these Jewish children were all saved from deportation by Marcel Marceau. He worked as a translator for General Patton, and his first major performance as a mime was in August 1944, shortly after the liberation in Paris, where he performed for over 3,000 liberation troops. Guy Moquet, he was a resistant. He was 17 years old. He came from a communist family, therefore he was considered a communist, and he was caught by the French police putting up anti-Nazi propaganda posters. He was arrested. They like to arrest Jews and communists and hold them as hostages. Hitler said, for every German soldier that was killed by the resistance, 100 hostages were to be executed. Now, the French thought, the Vichy government thought that was a little extreme, and so only 50 were executed for every German soldier. Well, Guy was one of the 50 people taken as a hostage and executed at the age of 17. They didn't care about ages. His brother Serge was so traumatized over his brother's death that 2 days after Guy had been put before the firing squad, his brother died. This gentleman, Parmentier, he was a French pharmacist and an agricultural expert. He is remembered for his support of the potato and establishing the potato as a viable food source. He's also remembered for his work in establishing the first smallpox vaccine, pioneering the extraction of sugar from a sugar beet, and he actually started a college devoted to the making of bread, of course, the baguettes. He studied and promoted refrigeration techniques and methods for preserving food. His tomb that you can see below, if you look at the green stuff around the tomb, those are potato plants. And if you go to Paris and you're in a metro station called Parmentier, that is the metro station named after him. And on the wall is a huge display commemorating this gentleman and his efforts with the potatoes. The lady on the right, she died young. She died at the age, I think, about 34. This lady was a very popular person in Paris, especially in the underground club scene. She was an electronic disc jockey, and she catered to the electro-hardcore music group. This type of music in the clubs were all dominated by men back then in the 1990s. She really broke a glass ceiling barrier and was very, very popular around the world. She performed in New York City, London, Moscow. In Paris, she performed at the Rex Club, the Batafar Club. At one point, she legally changed her name to Sex Toy. You can see the plaque there on the bottom, and that sits on her gravesite. She died of a heart attack. Her biggest fan was the mayor of Paris at the time. He personally authorized her to be buried in Père Lachaise. We all know Gertrude Stein, I'm sure. She lived in Paris. She coined the phrase, the lost generation, and there she is in her Paris apartment. She held very, very popular Saturday salons where she entertained all the leading intellectuals, writers, artists of the day, including Sinclair Lewis, Dali, Picasso, etc. If you look at the painting in the upper right-hand corner above where she's sitting, that is the painting that Picasso did of Gertrude Stein and gave it to her as a gift. When she saw it, she looked at Picasso and she said, "I don't look like that." And his response was, "You will." She moved permanently to Paris in 1903 with her brother, and they began collecting art. She was always fond of saying, "America is my country, but Paris is my home." During World War II, she and her partner, Alice Tokla, moved to a country home south of France, and that's where they rode out the war. They were in the unoccupied zone. Her art collection was protected by a high-ranking Vichy officer, And both Gertrude and Alice, both of whom were Jewish, were protected as well and were never touched by the Nazis or deportation. She translated Pétain's speeches and generally collaborated with the Vichy government. The gentleman on the right was a British citizen, Sir Richard Wallace. He became known for the Wallace fountains. And for many of you who have walked around Paris, that middle picture is a Wallace fountain. He was dismayed to see there was no running water in Paris that was drinkable. And so after moving to Paris from Great Britain, he worked as an art collector, art dealer, if you will, until the time he inherited a huge inheritance and he became a philanthropist. And he donated about 50 of these Wallace fountains in Paris. Many of them are still there, and some of them actually still work. He also gave money to restore the churches in Paris that were destroyed during the conflict of 1870-1871. He's buried in the Hertford Mausoleum that you see right there, and that is the ancient family name for Wallace. The fellow in the upper right-hand corner is Frederic Auguste Bartholdi. He is the gentleman who sculpted our Statue of Liberty, originally called Liberty Enlightening the World. He was a sculptor of small pieces, but he made a trip to Egypt in 1856 that inspired him to do giant monumental sculptures. In fact, he proposed a big sculpture for the Suez Canal, but he did not win the commission. He designed the Statue of Liberty, and he came up with the idea of giving this huge sculpture to the United States. In 1879, he was awarded the U.S. patent, believe it or not, for this sculpture of Lady Liberty. In 1880, the statue was delivered to the American ambassador in Paris, and 6 years later, after being carted in pieces across the pond, it was erected where we see it today on Liberty Island in New York City. The gentleman on the left, Brassai, he was a very famous photographer during the interwar period, interwar between World War I and World War II. He moved to Paris in 1924, and he began wandering the streets at night with his Leica camera. All of his photos are in black and white. Very hard, by the way, to find images that I can legally use. This is one of the few images that is available because all of his work is licensed. He published his first book in 1933. It was called Paris by Night. I have that book, and it's fascinating, the photos. He's really known for his photos of what we call the underbelly of Paris. In other words, the nightlife in Paris that was at the brothels, the prostitutes, the gay nightclubs. All these people had a great respect for him and allowed him to photograph inside the establishments with all these people. He photographed Dali, Picasso, Matisse, all the people who were famous. To me, Brassai was very similar to Charles Marvell. Charles Marvell was a photographer in the mid-19th century, and he documented the old Paris before it was destroyed by Haussmann. So you can put the photos together and say, here's the old and here's the new. Anyways, Brassai's photos, I think, are just as important as Marvell's. Dreyfus. Many of us probably have heard about the Dreyfus affair in France in the turn of the century, the 20th century. He was a Jewish French artillery officer. He did not consider himself Jewish. He considered himself French. Religion had played no role in his thought process. But the Dreyfus affair started when he was arrested, convicted, and imprisoned in Devil's Island for passing on secrets to the Germans. He maintained his innocence. I've been to Devil's Island. I've seen the little island off the island where they built a hut that he was put in solitary confinement for 5 years. He spent 5 years there, but he was wrongly accused. And it's a whole big story, but it created a scandal across France, and it really brought to the surface the anti-Semitism that was in France at the time. You had people who thought he was guilty. They were the anti-Semitic group. Then you had the people who thought he was innocent. They had names for both of these, but he was ultimately exonerated. And when the real spy confessed and the army cover-up of this whole thing was exposed, it was quite a scandal and very embarrassing to the government. But he was promoted and he served in World War I. Marceline was a French writer, director, and author. She was a Holocaust survivor at the age of 16. She and her father were captured. Her father told her on the way to Auschwitz, "I will not come back, but you will." She wrote a book 2 years before she died called "But You Didn't Come Back." And I've read that book. Excellent book. And she later in life began to produce films about the Holocaust. Sarah Kaufman, again, I read her book called Rue Ordinaire, Rue là-bas, and it was a book about her experiences growing up. She was a Jewish child growing up in Paris. Her mother sent her to a Catholic family to hide her during the occupation. Many Jewish mothers would not do that because they were afraid their children would be converted to Catholicism. Anyways, she survived the occupation, and when she went back to her mother, lo and behold, the Catholic woman who hid her did a pretty good job of converting her to Catholicism. She was a worldwide expert on Friedrich Nietzsche, and on Friedrich Nietzsche's 150th birthday, Sarah Kaufman committed suicide. These are a couple of despicable people from the war. On the left, you have Pierre Laval, who was 3 times Prime Minister of France, twice in the Vichy government. He was responsible for collaborating with the Nazis. The Nazis decided when they wanted to deport the Jews from France, they didn't want the children. They didn't want them under 16. Pierre Laval said, "We're sending the children because I don't know what to do with them." And so he is responsible for almost 11,000 children being deported and killed by the Nazis. He was captured after the liberation. He was put on trial, convicted, and sentenced to death, and he was executed by a firing squad in October of 1945. The illustration at the top right, in the right-hand corner, is Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon. The gentleman on the left is Jacques Verger, who was his lawyer. This fellow was a French-Vietnamese lawyer and an anti-colonial activist. He actually was a resistance fighter during the occupation, and he worked for the Free French. He supported the militants during the Algerian War of Independence, and he was quite upset that the French government was using the same torture tactics that the Germans used during World War II. When Klaus Barbie was captured and brought to trial in 1987, Verger's defense was to deflect the case from Barbie. And one of the ways he tried to do that was to put France on trial for its actions during the Algerian conflict. Those are the 3 major cemeteries with some people, but I did not want to neglect the dog cemeteries. This is the dog cemetery. And again, for those of you who are old enough, you remember Rusty and Rin Tin Tin in the late 1950s. This is where Rin Tin Tin is buried, but it's not Rusty's Rin Tin Tin. This is the original Rin Tin Tin. This dog was saved by an American soldier during World War I and trained to act in the silent movies. This dog made 27 silent movies directed by Daryl Zanuck, and it's this dog is credited for establishing the career of Zanuck in Hollywood. He's also credited. No, you can go back. Yeah, he's also credited for. That's your way of telling me my time's up, right? Popularity of German Shepherds went sky high after Rin Tin Tin. So Rusty's dog, Rin Tin Tin, was number 4 in the succession of Rin Tin Tins. Today, there's actually another Rin Tin Tin, and it's number 12. These are some of the books. The book in the upper right-hand corner we're trying to put together, and that's basically walks through the cemeteries where we introduce you to the curious occupants.
fantastic. And what's amazing is behind each of these stories that you just brush through so quickly, there is a whole wealth of interest and information.
Oh, I only touched the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. So you could go into each one of these. So just to remind everybody that you can find Stu's guidebooks, but you can sign up to his blog on stuross.com. And we have a question from Joan. Are any of these cemeteries open at night? That's a very good question.
I believe they close at dark. At dusk, they don't allow anybody in. The other thing, too, is you're not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to bring picnic lunches or drinks into the cemeteries as well.
Mm. Mark says, I joined late. There has been recent coverage in the States about Victor Noir burial site in Père Lachaise. Any comments?
No, I haven't seen anything here in the United States that have focused on that grave site, but it's one of the more unique grave sites in Père Lachaise. No question about it.
I know absolutely nothing about it.
Oh, you've never seen Victor Noir?
I have never been. I was waiting for this presentation, so now I will go.
Victor Noir, he made an enemy of somebody he should not have made an enemy of. And one day his enemy walked up to him and shot him and killed him. And they buried him there, put that bronze effigy on. And over the years, the ladies have decided to use it as a fertility site.
Oh, I get it.
You saw what the sculptor did with his...
Yes.
Okay.
It's fascinating that time runs through all these stories, and now today the victims are right alongside the perpetrators in some of these.
Yes. We, in doing our research for the cemetery book, that book I showed you on the upper right-hand corner, we went to Montmartre to do some research, and one of the graves we tried to find was Laval's, and we couldn't find it. And I'm not putting anything in a book that I haven't seen with my two eyes. And so we went to the gate to the house, and they weren't very friendly. And so I'm going to have to find a way to find out exactly where his grave is. He was supposed to have been buried next to his daughter and his son-in-law, who that's an entirely different story in itself.
Right. I can imagine they must be the target of quite a bit of...
When you research these people, it's amazing because there are so many side stories that you go down that lead to separate stories that are connected to the main one.
Yes, exactly. Well, you'll have to come back and tell us when you find out more. Mark says, I hope to see the burial site of Marquis de Lafayette. Any comments?
Yes, that's at Picpus. That is one of the two private cemeteries. The French government allowed this cemetery to be a privately owned cemetery. The only way you can be buried there is if you have documented proof that one of your family members was executed by the guillotine during the French Revolution. In the back portion of the cemetery are two major mass burial pits where they buried over 1,000 people who faced the guillotine nearby. The wall with the gate that the carts used to bring the bodies and the heads back in, that is still there with the original doors. Right up next to the mass graves, which are separated from the rest of the cemetery by a wall and a gate, right on the right-hand side is where Lafayette is buried. There's an American flag flying there. He's married next to his wife. His wife lost almost all of her family to the revolution, to the guillotine, and her relatives are buried in one of those mass grave sites. So Lafayette was allowed to be buried there next to his wife. The American flag that's flying, it's the only American flag that was allowed to stay up during the occupation by the Germans in deference to Lafayette.
Oh, no.
Took us, It took us probably 30, 40 minutes to find the entrance, very nondescript entrance to this.
But it's worth it.
Oh,
Go for it.
absolutely. I mean, if you're into the French Revolution and whatnot, or into cemeteries, that is a cemetery to go to. No question.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for that question.
Yeah,
so I'd like to invite everybody to our next event. We'll be convening again here very soon. We are back on Sunday, November the 3rd, with the second part of Jeffrey Iverson's Ile de la Cité, The Cradle of Paris. In part 1, we learned about the history and the heritage and the architecture. And now this part 2, we will meet the people that keep it alive today. I would like to thank you again, Stu and Sandy behind the scenes. We're already looking forward to your next visit.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, everybody. And from all of us at Bonjour Paris, merci et à bientôt.